All right, welcome back. Masari Happy Hour, episode 3. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to kick it off with a disclaimer. All opinions expressed by our hosts and our guests are merely their own opinions. They do not reflect any endorsements or any opinions of their companies. This discussion is meant for informational purposes only. You should not take their opinions as investment advice, as you will be solely responsible for your own investment. Hosts and guests may hold cryptocurrencies discussed in this Twitter Spaces. Additionally, certain Masari employees are required to disclose their holdings, which is updated monthly and available on our website. I'm going to go ahead and share that as we kind of kick off the general discussion. We just came back from close to a week-long offsite in Nashville, and we wanted to start the show with kind of general takeaways. I think it was a pretty exciting experience for most of us being remote. Some U.S. employees, a few international, and we kind of got to join up for the first time and meet each other in person without beating a dead horse. I think I had 3 main takeaways. One, just the level of talent from individual to individual was, I think, what you would imagine from a company like Masari. We had some really interesting breakout sessions. I personally am only in marketing, but I can only imagine what our data science team and research team had amongst themselves. And kind of the last main takeaway was just how much we really have coming down the pipeline on Masari's roadmap. So I think we've got some exciting things happening, more tools, more announcements to come pre-mainnet. So keep your eyes peeled on the Masari team. We're definitely working during this market, and I think everybody's super stoked. So with that, we're going to kick it off with Web3 social. Dustin recently wrote a piece on the Open Social Map, which I can link as well, kind of pitching a decentralized social network, much different from obviously what we're using now with Twitter. So without further ado, Dustin, kick us off.
Sure, appreciate it, Doug. Before we just jump in there, right? Like Doug, next time we're just have you sing, because your voice is beautiful. But just to kick off like Open Social, like it really is like a fundamental different way of thinking about kind of how we just architect, not just like social platforms, but like just the way we work too. It's not just media or any of this stuff. Like I think I had a line in there that I kind of liked actually. It was like crypto isn't just like a financial tool, right? We've all got excited about DeFi. We've got excited about all these kind of like, number go up type of situations. But like, really at its heart of it, it's kind of like this social organizational tool, right? It's how we organize capital. It's how we like organize, work, right? Like where DAOs are paying out people right now. And what we're really missing is that kind of that tool that natively really brings, users on the blockchain, into these DAOs, right? Like, DAO structures right now kind of sitting offline. It's very disparate. It's in Discords. It's in Twitter. It's in Governor, right? The Masari product. It's in Tally. It's in Boardroom. It's all these other stuff, right? We don't really have that really native way to kind of like identify social organizations. And that's what Lens is going to do, right? I mean, Lens has like this very open, framework for defining, what they're going to call is like an open social graph. You think that's kind of a complex term, right? All that really means is like, who knows who's posting what content, right? Kind of that history between your profile, right? So once that's all built out, you've got like a whole graph of people to find out. That's how you can do some really cool things, not just on the DAO space and work, but like also from, linking back into DeFi as well. Aave, we know Lens is coming out of Aave, which, let me pause there for a minute. Just from a disclosure standpoint, I've got a Aave spread going on. So I'm currently long Aave just from a disclosure standpoint. But jumping back into it, right? Aave is, building out, and, like if you think about Aave, right, the big thing is it's over collateralized lending. We got to put in more money that we can take out, right? How do we get to that real world under collateralized lending space, right? Where you can, maybe take out future revenue. Like if you're DAO, I've got a contract to get paid 100 grand this year, right? I can take forward future revenue because all that's only going to be on chain, right? We've got payment streaming with, oh, I forgot about it. So if somebody will jump in, remind me. But, you know, you can define all like the future flows of revenue, just not just DAOs, but even like from creators and stuff like this. So to me, it's just a really interesting way to kind of re-architect how like, you know, one, that we just do social, but just, you know, take it to the next level of how we kind of like architect almost society level stuff at the same time.
Yeah, I'll jump in here and add some notes to follow up on what Dustin was saying. If you really zoom out and think about like these credit networks and just really any sort of like social coordination, it gets down to these social graphs. And for basically all of history, we've had these closed social graphs that are gate kept, and for the first time ever, like we're building something out on chain that's accessible and viewable by anyone in the world. And what really excites me about this is just the amount of innovation that we're going to see coming out of this. So a really difficult thing with like social media platforms is, you know, you have to bootstrap those network effects, make them sticky. And really now, like with Lens launching, you know, we're going to see a couple of these like 1 to 2 base layer social graphs built out, but then the amount of applications and stuff that you can build composably on top of that, I think is just going to be enormous and really going to be like what drives the next big source of innovation within this space and more broadly within like our existing physical world.
And I think we should just probably note that Dustin, your post was out before Vitalik's, right? So he probably like he copied you on that one.
That's what do we think? What happened?
Yeah. What do we think about the concept of soul-bound NFTs? I know Vitalik mentioned that, and that goes into sort of the general theme we're talking about here.
I think actually it gets really, really kind of interesting here if you almost just combine it all, right? So, you know, you have this social aspect, and those could be transferable NFTs, but part of it could be soul-bound NFTs. But I really, really like about the idea of that is like locking in social collateral, right? So I know, Dustin, you had mentioned that Aave, you know, by nature of crypto, so people don't run away with the money, we have to use over-collateralized lending, right? But what if, as these social graphs grow, as you have a lot of soul-bound NFTs in your social graph, right, you have like a personal social collateral built up on this address such that you don't want to tarnish that. And I get that it makes it kind of difficult. So how do you like measure the value of this social collateral? That's, you know, going to be a big challenge for somebody to solve. But perhaps I could borrow $100 against $60 and then $70 of social collateral, right? Like you can start to bring these things together, and the dynamic growth and the identity that forms with your digital wallet, your like digital sovereign identity, that begins to unlock a whole field of new possibilities, right? You get this marriage where it's social, but that social becomes financial. The same way now, like maybe a banker just likes you and you can get a better loan because of that social thing. I think that is important. And I think that's something that we haven't been able to tap into crypto. And we're so early on this whole evolution of the idea.
I definitely think that's like where like you have like the biggest impact is right where you get that kind of like under collateralized lending, you know, really kind of bring in your, when we say social collateral, right, that's like your brand image, right? If a company wants to borrow against kind of essentially their reputation, right? The one thing is like as I think through this though, I don't know if it's like purely reputation scores, right? That it's going to be the thing that we're going off of. Like to me, like, you know, that's what we used to do, right? We had like we resorted to like Mike's a good guy, you know, like let's give him $100. But like now, like if you got all the payments on chain, right? Superfluid is the protocol I forgot about earlier. But like if you basically like you got your salary on chain, let's say you got your stupid little side gig on chain, right? And we can define out kind of your future cash flows, and we can now discount that back to kind of a sort of a present value, sort of likelihood of you getting that. And like you can also use basically future payments as your collateral. So whether it's Messari and all the subscriptions are on chain, right? borrowing against kind of like, okay, expected future revenue growth and stuff like that. I think you're going to want really everything on chain and saying like, all right, this is the amount of money I've got coming in is what I can borrow against. Or else you kind of get into these funky systems and people are trying to play these game theoretic like schemes essentially around reputation, trying to game some sort of algorithm.
So my question going off of this stuff is, do you guys see kind of like the source of these under collateralized loans and capital payments? Do you see that coming from a group of people, or like on an individual peer-to-peer basis? So in terms of like the group, let's say you have an idea for a side business and you want to put the future cash flows up as collateral for that. Are you going to be presenting that to like a small group that's managing a certain amount like on chain, or is it just going to be you post it up for anyone to see that request and someone can come fill it on like a peer-to-peer basis?
I think it becomes competitive, right? Like right now, I don't know if anybody's ever gotten bored and like filled out a mortgage calculator or something. I made that mistake once, put in my email, and I got 7, 8, 90 offers from all these different mortgage companies trying to rip me off, right? Well, imagine that this becomes a competition space, right? We talk about how interoperable these social graphs are, right? Like one protocol, one team might build the social graph, more teams might build like the front end on top of that, other teams build an algorithm layer, and everybody tries to compete to be the highest value add. Now take that to the lending. That's a portion of it, right? It's like there will be different protocols that analyze the behaviors and classify you, and they say, hey, like, I think I can assign scores of reputability. I think I can assign scores of how much you should be able to borrow against. And then they might like try to provide that service to Aave, right? Aave might work with one team for a while, but then all of a sudden, everybody that this team says is of good credit starts to default. So there, Aave is going to say, all right, we're not using your Oracle anymore. We're not using your social credit Oracle anymore, or something like that. We're going to use these other people. So I think it opens a competition space. Like that's something that can be intellectually outsourced to the groups of people who want to put their name to these scores and these rankings.
Yeah, I mean I actually kind of agree with a lot of what you're saying right there. That's because it does come very competitive. Everyone's competing at essentially the algorithm layer to say like, okay, who's this Mikey guy, and should we fund his OnlyFans? I don't know, but you know what I'm saying, like you gotta figure out what's going on here, and I do think like it's really hard to give a definitive answer and say that you're gonna have this or that, but it's always going to be a blend of both, right? You're going to have kind of the Aave, very traditional, like let's borrow against just future revenues. You can have like certain things, like you're not going to have subscribers. You're not going to have like future revenues you can borrow against. You're going to have like, okay, Mike's a good guy. We can see a little bit about Mike and kind of determine something. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see how it all plays out. It's really hard to sit here right now and say like, this is how exactly everything's going to scale out, because you get this. When you get into a hyper competitive situation, or with like, you can get 3 dudes and just know how to code and go find something. And they can build a whole business around that, right? Just with open social data.
Dustin, you got to disclose your OnlyFans before we move forward as well.
I've got a more simple question for Dustin here. In your opening statement, you highlighted kind of an old world Web 2 problem in cold starting and acquiring new users, and that kind of leads into different ways to monetize. Do you think that these monetization models that Lens is introducing are going to be enough for the platform to be successful enough for it to have staying power?
That's interesting. There's 2 questions there, right? It's like, does it have staying power after the fact? All right, obviously kind of hard to answer without seeing a product, right? But does it get a bunch of users, basically from token incentives, or whether it's like these interesting revenue models? 100%, right? I mean, we've clearly just proven we can get them 500,000 users overnight, basically saying like, okay, here's some token incentives. So I don't think there's going to be any shortage of that, and I definitely think we're going to probably do some experimenting that's probably not exactly sustainable when it comes to token incentives. So I do think it's just gonna be a really powerful concept, particularly going into kind of this economic, like, I don't know if you call it recession or not, but like you got like a down economic period, people, hiring freezes, all this kind of stuff, you're going to be looking for ways to make money, right? So if you find that like, oh, there's some of the open social stuff I can get paid for my post and stuff, like that's a driver, right? These token incentives, you layer that on, that's another driver. Like whether it has staying power, like that's where we can kind of like, to me, it just becomes a function of like how iterable it is, right? So if you've got open social data, you've got everyone can compete around that, and launch the token, kind of incentivize users, and not just can build full on, social applications the way we think of them today. Like Twitter owns data, algorithm, presentation layer, everything, right? It's someone can compete and just like, okay, this is a cool feature, and someone takes that and puts it back into one of their front end apps, right? So there's different ways to create all sorts of new stuff, new interesting things that I think is definitely going to appeal to people, right? Like existing users of Twitter and stuff, even just from a viewing standpoint.
Two parts here. Do you guys think that this is more effective at the application level to build on top of an existing layer one, or something like that DeSo is doing to kind of create their own whole chain for a social network? And then going off of that, is this like a winner takes all, winner takes most kind of scenario where we only have 1, 2, 3 social graphs? Or, I mean, do you guys think that the amount of social graphs will just explode?
All right, well, those are two really big questions, Chase. So we're going to do one by one and probably forget about the second one. So remind me if we come back to the second one. So the first one was, sorry, totally lost. What was the first one? What was the first question?
First one is application level versus
Yes.
Network level social graphs.
All right, so you think about what we were just talking. I mean, most of this discussion was all basically around finances, right? It was like, oh, we want to do under-collateralized lending. We want to do these interesting payment networks and all this kind of stuff, right? Well, if you're on your own network and you don't have DeFi contracts, you don't have like these primitives, Aave, Uniswap, et cetera, that are built out, battle tested. It's a really hard place. You're gonna rebuild all social and then rebuild all of DeFi. Like if we're saying a lot of the value is almost in a financial aspect, you kind of need it kind of sitting together, playing nice with each other, right? So that's where it kind of like almost sits at this application layer. So I do think it's hard to say like, okay, this is definitely wins or doesn't win, but like if we believe financial is like the number one thing these social graphs are basically kind of competing on, then I do see it being kind of hard for like isolated chains that are just doing social and essentially just recreating the same social, but like, hey, you own your data and those kind of things. Those are really loose arguments. Money's a very hard argument that really brings in users.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I think just kind of like the name of social, everyone kind of just jumps to it as a replacement for our Web2 social media platforms. But going back to what you highlighted at the beginning, like this is what underpins just everything going forward. So really the sky's the limit at the application level, I think.
Yeah. And I think that is an interesting question there too, though, of like, I think this is your second question. I remembered it this time of, like, do we have multiple social graphs essentially, on the same network? And I think that's actually kind of tough. I think it does you can't just fork it. This isn't a Uniswap. This isn't an Aave. This isn't whatever, right? Because once you've got, it requires on like users to click buttons, right? You can't fork users clicking buttons. Like it means for you to follow all this kind of stuff. Like if Mike wants to follow me or we want to follow Mike's OnlyFans, like that requires us to click buttons and like actually go take action. So then now we're holding the follow NFTs and all this kind of stuff to where you can't just fork that kind of thing. So I do think it becomes like kind of competitive and kind of like calcifies to a degree because the history matters, like the comment history, because if we're talking about reputations, all this kind of stuff, that's a history function. That's a time function. So I do think it actually kind of gets really hard to compete with almost one big social graph, right?
Beautiful. Let's roll into the next here. So, Mike, you brought up a point when we were kind of discussing amongst ourselves on the topic of moats in crypto, and to frame that, which L1s and protocols have defensible positions versus which may be more suited to be a public good. You want to jump into that topic?
Yeah, definitely. I think first I'll set the scene here a little bit, right? So we all know a moat is essentially like how well can you defend your position. If I'm a DEX, how well can I keep other DEXs from stealing my volume? If I'm a lending market, how well can I keep other lending markets from stealing my that? If I'm an L1, it's users, right? And then using crypto native lingo, it's how hard are you to fork, right? How quickly can someone fork the code and spin up a competitive copy of you? And I want to make it clear that just to set the tone of this is a much more long time frame, right? There's a lot of noise in crypto. There's a lot of speculation in crypto, and price does not equal a moat, right? Like if a protocol is worth $60 billion, it doesn't mean they have a moat or not, right? And then the same thing is having a moat doesn't make you good. You can build a moat around bad things too. Like I can build a moat around selling really, really ugly shoes. I'm the best at it. I've got all the resources to make the ugliest shoes in the world. No one can copy me, but there's no value accrual there, right? So I think it's important to think on two things, the moat, and then does value accrue behind that moat? And in my opinion, I think you have to look for things that can't be forked. So I think using Yearn is one of my favorite examples. Let's say I fork the Yearn code right now. What I cannot fork is the Yearn brain power, right? They've built a pretty good flywheel model of essentially utilizing the Wi-Fi token as a financial asset to pay out their contributors. And then those contributors know that working with Yearn gets them a revenue share from those contracts. So I might fork Yearn on Monday, but when they launch that new strategy on Friday, I'm already behind. Or Maker, where you're just talking about social and reputation. Maker is the only major, in my opinion, crypto protocol that is hyper decentralized, but also they get to communicate with real world banks. Like Maker has given loans to banks. That reputation is something that you can't fork, right? So I think that, we get lost in the source of the noise a lot, and people might assume that a high volume DEX has a moat. But in my opinion, most DEXs don't have moat. Like why would I use a DEX that accrues value to a token? Why wouldn't someone just launch a DEX that has bare minimum fees to attract, the liquidity needed to get the users, right? So in my opinion, that's more of a public good than a moat. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think and like where you guys think people think has a moat that doesn't have a moat or vice versa.
I think at the application layer, like you were saying, you can definitely try to build moats, but there becomes sort of a flywheel with development and users. I think that just bubbles up even more to the L1 layer. I mean, Ethereum is the most forked protocol. Everyone just forks Geth and starts their own blockchain, but all of the value keeps accruing because the Ethereum development base just keeps powering on new applications and implementations and improvements on the base layer. And it just makes Ethereum block space the most valuable commodity in sort of the broader ecosystem. Yeah, I think it's an open question right now.
Yeah, I'm going to put the L1 thing to the side, right? Because I think that's actually it's kind of hard to fork the L1 side. But the application layer, I'm like a little bit more, I guess, bearish on the defensibility of, let's say, a DEX or Aave and stuff like that, right? Because you can always incentivize liquidity, and if it functions the same, like it's kind of tough. Like, there are some brand aspects that definitely plays a bet. The one thing I do actually think is like heavily defensible is stable coins, right? Like you can't just fork Maker and say like, okay, great, we're going to print 10 billion of DAI, and then we're also going to go shove it into every single useful application, right? Whether it's Aave, Compound, you name it, right? You can't like just incentivize liquidity across the entire ecosystem like that in your stable coin. Like we've probably seen some recent projects kind of fail at doing that. So that to me is like the most significant thing that I don't think you can really fork over a long period of time.
Do you think aggregators can destroy the moat of brands? So I like to use Dex aggregator. Say you like to use 1inch or Zapper to do some trades, and then it doesn't matter if so I personally, the Balancer, I don't use them a lot. It's not a brand I personally think of a lot, but if I get routed through it, Balancer is getting that volume. So there's also an abstraction, right? Like you can build that layer on top that almost makes branding irrelevant to the consumer side.
I mean, I'm going to be honest, all this stuff that we're using on chain, we probably just shouldn't be using as regular day-to-day users. We're just, this is infrastructure that we just happen to have a UI to, right? So it's just thinking about it from a consumer standpoint and from a defensibility mode, that's kind of tough. It's really kind of it's all numbers, right? It's all clear, I've got the most liquidity, I can offer the cheapest rates. Uniswap, by far the most efficient DEX. And if we abide by kind of the guidelines, the licensing on their code, right, no one can fork it, more or less. So yeah, I mean, Uniswap is just most efficient, right? So it's kind of the brain power behind the team and stuff like that. But in general, it's just kind of honestly kind of ironic to even think about it from a user standpoint of users. You know what I'm saying?
I think too, as the space continues to mature and grow, the ones that really get the established integrations with real world businesses and use cases, that's going to be a moat of itself almost. Choosing which ones they want to plug into, a lot of these standard businesses, that they like to choose a stack and stick with it, and they'll do a lot of research going into that decision. But so I think as the space grows, that the stickiness will become more apparent. And right now, we're just so early in the DeFi and crypto life cycles to really understand what will stick. And then just one other thing to bring up is the idea of these treasuries and resources. You could also add protocol controlled value underneath that. Obviously, a lot of these protocols are just going to be incentivizing users and depleting their treasury over time in order to stay relevant. But I think the ones that can bootstrap and keep themselves afloat more just easily have such a natural advantage.
Do we think moats only get bigger in the bear markets because folks who have liquidity and funds right now are able to continue to grow while others are in sort of survival mode? So these moats only get bigger as we go through more cycles?
I think the fundamentals play a lot bigger of a role. You see that Curve is losing a lot of TVL, and trading volume, like Dustin said, is moving over to a more efficient platform on Uni V3, and kind of when all the incentives and inorganic usage starts to dry up, you see the migration over towards more organic, sustainable uses.
Organic usage has popped up pretty relevantly with the UST collapse, right? That was a pretty inorganic case for the thing. And you just talked about how Uniswap has the organic users, right? Because they don't need to run these wild incentive programs or have the VE lockup model of Curve. And, Dustin, this actually ties back to decentralized social, right? That's a organic demand for these things. We know people love the social product. Do you think maybe that's kind of the key that, we love the degens and I love it, but a lot of this is just leverage moving token A to token B and wrapping it to A dot C dot whatever, right? What are some of the more organic things you think we can build out here? Or is just being organic a moat?
Organic DeFi? I think Uni V3 Maker are probably the two shining examples of just organic DeFi. If you plot out kind of Uni V3 or just total Uni liquidity across time, and then Curve, right? You just kind of see during that huge bull run that we essentially had from let's call it from July of last year to right about roughly now, and we had this huge swell of DeFi TVL. like Uni, like surprisingly pretty flat, right? From a stablecoin perspective. And then it's all just, everything just goes into Curve, right? So it's like kind of, we saw like a lot of leverage just get built up into what we traditionally thought was like kind of this organic liquidity and stuff. But I don't know. I don't know if I really care, to be honest, because like we're in this experiment stage to where like of course we're experimenting with leverage, we're experimenting with all these different little things, and like we want to say like, oh, it's coming down, all this kind of stuff, and it's organic versus inorganic. But it's just all experiments, right? We're building huge financial infrastructure into where we kind of just need to experiment. Like you're going to need to experiment with leverage, right? You're going to need to see how these kind of systems ebb and flow. So like the organic thing is just going to grow steadily over time, and the inorganic is just, it's going to come into protocols and come out of the protocols, ebb and flow. But does that mean the protocol like necessarily is bad? Did it serve this particular function at this point in time for leverage? Like probably not, right? It could have a very viable use case, later down the line. It doesn't mean like just because we have leverage built up into a system right now that a protocol necessarily is bad. It's just tokens following money incentives. So. Unless it all collapses, right? Then it's bad. Then I'm going to retract my statements, and it's all bad.
Yeah. So one of the kind of catch-all statements that I use a lot, and I hear other people use a lot, just circles the spaces, right? The fees go to zero, essentially, right? That it's really, really hard to be rent-seeking in open industry and like decentralized access to infrastructure. And Chase, you had a really good piece highlighting this, where you looked at the financial services, like these TradFi providers, and I believe the number is like they make $5.5 trillion a year. And it was kind of interesting. You framed that, instead of saying that this is profit and this is a value add, you kind of made the bold claim like this is a tax on society, actually, right? This is a friction of our current system that's being extracted. So I don't know, maybe you just kind of want to explore that idea of like fees going to zero might make us think, oh, these tokens all become worthless and stuff like that. But how do you see actually more value being unlocked by fees going to zero?
Yeah, I'm not sure where the value is actually going to accrue in terms of the stack here. Maybe that just all sinks down to like a layer one. Maybe it just stays in the consumer's pockets. But it's something I've been thinking about a lot more recently, in that, we're building these open networks to be public goods in a sense. And like having these rent-seeking protocols sitting on top of it, like that's just, it's not really sustainable if we don't necessarily need them, because, you deploy the code once and it's sitting out there. Anyone can fork it and do something without a fee. But, like really flipping it on its head and approaching something like that, and thinking of it as an expense versus revenue for a specific sector. I'm a believer that, financial services is going to become like embedded into just about every other industry that we have on planet Earth. You already see this with a bunch of the fintechs pivoting to embedded business models using open APIs and stuff. And DeFi is, in my opinion, just kind of like the culmination of that. And it just doesn't really seem right to have, if it's embedded to all of these things, to necessarily have a standalone sector still just sucking a lot of value out of people's pockets, if the name of the game is capital efficiency at the end of the day.
Chase, what were those numbers again? It was $5 trillion or something like that a year?
Yeah, so McKinsey did some sort of study. Doug, I think there might be a image in one of my tweet threads recently, if you want to throw it on the bookmark. But they created like this chart that showed all the different types of financial service providers and all of kind of like the rent-seeking fees and intermediation fees that they take for facilitating the financial system, and it added up to $5.5 trillion. And we talk about like what's the total addressable market cap of DeFi. A lot of people benchmark it to banks and whatnot. And I don't think that's necessarily the right way to go about it, because it's going to be more so us removing all of these inefficiencies and not necessarily extracting them out from the system to begin with.
Yeah, and I think we in crypto, I think, tend to say this could go all the way to whatever that $5.5 trillion number, and then people in finance say, oh, there's no way you're going to get rid of any of that. These systems have been built up over time and battle tested, and there's a real service you're paying for here. But I think the reality is probably somewhere in the middle. Even if I can actually address, 10, 20% of that market, that's enormous. Just on an annual basis, not even thinking about sort of ongoing, if you were to think about that as sort of a revenue stream. So, I think, and this is where I get frustrated coming from traditional finance and then hearing traditional finance folks kind of laugh when DeFi numbers go down or crypto, market cap goes down. It's, they're missing all of the potential efficiencies we could be weeding out and just how big this market is that we can actually improve things with.
Do you think, here's kind of an open, wider question. So say we take that down to zero, right? And this 5.5 trillion is all of a sudden gone. Does the outcome of this create strange hyper-financialization in other places, or does it de-financialize like the greater system, right? Like I could see a world where now that there's 5.5 free trillion extra dollars essentially not being rent-seeked, does that get pumped into decentralized social? And it's good, and associating value with collaboration will have good outcomes. But sometimes I think maybe I shouldn't look at the numbers on the chart so much, and it's a little scary thought to talk about like charts on numbers relative to people. Or do you think like you almost can get to an idyllic world where, hey, it costs less to be a human now, right? You don't have to pay so many fees, you don't have to pay so much rent to exist as a person, and you kind of get back to a less financialized outcome. Like, it's a question too big to know like the full answer to, but I'm just curious to hear everybody's thoughts.
I think a little bit of both. So on the first point about, like taking fees down and it costing less to live a normal standard of living life, that's kind of like the long-term outcome of technological innovation, is to create more efficiencies, more people can enjoy the same level standard of living. So in that sense, I agree that there will be less financialization. But if you look at what an NFT is and the fact that you can wrap any unique item in a digital wrapper, it's going to be the same thing as kind of like the financialization of everything in the traditional financial world. And like you're going to be able to bet on so many different things that have just not been possible before. We're in like the very early stages of seeing this be leveraged by like the creator economy and community. But I think once you start to wrap like mortgages and real world assets as NFTs as well, like we're going to unlock a huge.
Yeah, I think I just agree with Chase. So it becomes less financialized in the sense that we're not going to have like these big banks that need to pay billions of dollars essentially regulatory costs, because that 5.5 trillion number, I'd be wondering like how much of that is like just regulation upkeep cost. But like it also becomes more financialized in the sense of everything we're seeing is going to be kind of this gamified thing, sort of financialized. Like you think like, what is a bank even doing anyway, right? It's taking in deposits and reallocating the capital costs, lending and all this kind of stuff. Well, in DeFi land, it's just the user takes their money and just LPs it directly, or just takes it and deposits it directly into Aave, right? So you're going to cut down essentially all the bloated costs, right? Like you think of what a FIS and a Fiserv do, right? They make billions of dollars of just running transactions. Well, Ethereum covers that, right? So we're going to take away kind of like almost this big financial pillar of the sector, but we're going to transfer that back down into the user level. So like the user's lives, I think gets more financialized to a degree. But I think go ahead, Dan.
No. So, DeFi, you are essentially the bank. I just wonder how many people are willing to be the bank, right? And we're at sort of the forefront right now. So you have, I think, the most sort of degen kind of people in all these DeFi protocols and at the bleeding edge of willing to be able to take risks. But the majority of people are not going to be the ones who want to play around in DeFi games and Ponzi-nomics and all of that stuff. It's going to be the real world applicable use cases like mortgages and things like that actually abstract away financial services, on top of just like the obvious use cases like DEXs and borrowing and lending and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, this is where like the bankless guys are going to be like, okay, jump up and down and get all excited, right? Because their DeFi mullet thing is really not. I kind of agree with, right? So like, but I don't think you can rent this track kind of to what we've been talking about on top of Aave, and it's just going to be too competitive. Like, I think, like, just take the Apple Notes app. That's free. One of my favorite note apps. We went through this whole shebang of like trying out fancy note apps, but now, me and a lot of other people I know just kind of use Apple Notes, right? It's just going to be like this free layer of like kind of just standard applications that you can use, and all they'll do is like it'll be like another protocol, in my opinion, that just routes is like, okay, we're going to basically deposit an Aave, but it's going to dress it up in something that's a little bit more user friendly and approachable.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but honestly, I'm getting really, really excited and addicted to the thought of like what the decentralized what these social graphs kind of do. Do you think you could see an evolution of like the concept of banking where now part of the social graph is like a hive mind aspect to banking, where it's not even a DAO or it's not even like a bank that goes on chain, but it's all this value has kind of congregated and it's essentially created a pseudo bank, and there's now this layer where people come on top and it follows this is all very amorphous wording because it's so far out, but do you think like the hive mind of social media, as soon as it is at the same layer of the financial instruments, do you think that hive mind is what recreates the traditional idea of banking, what recreates the traditional idea of mortgages? Like, could you get some crazy things going on in there?
I've thought about this a bit, and what I've kind of settled on is everything you've just described is essentially the role that a credit union plays, where it's a bunch of people, more distributed, putting their capital together, and you see it in more of like these localized, smaller communities. And if anything, DeFi has shown us, you can break all of this down to very tiny levels. Like the individuals are now the banks, and just like all capitalist systems, like there's just going to be bundling and rebundling, unbundling, rebundle. So I think it's inevitable for people to kind of form these social groups and essentially be like their own little mini hedge fund credit unions of sorts.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Almost to get like philosophical with it, right? What is like a bank even doing anyway? They're taking in the society's money and then kind of allocating it out and saying like, all right, society, humanity, what's important and where can you make money? Well, like that, they're making kind of the decisions for humanity on saying like, okay, this is the most productive thing for humanity. Well, now you kind of decentralize this, and you kind of to Mike's crazy ideas, right? Now, like it gets very individualistic. You're gonna have like small pods of kind of like people voting with their capital of like, this is the most interesting thing to me. This is the most like, this is the most like, thing I think is going to produce society forward, right? Because you're betting on this long-term, basic capital appreciation. That's what the individual decisions are going to be. So it just comes like it turns like society into this giant voting machine for what they think is going to be valuable in the future.
All right, let's shift really quick. We had in the middle of the month a 180 shift here. Tom dropped a note after Coinbase announced their earnings report. Some FUD going on, and shortly thereafter, Chase followed up with a pretty huge announcement from Coinbase and kind of a strategic shift of sorts. So, Tom, I'll throw it to you, and let's talk about what Coinbase is doing.
I got your transition. Coinbase cannot be charging 1% transaction fees forever. Transaction fees will be going closer to zero. So, but despite their really favorable revenue capture at the moment, folks were concerned because there was a disclosure about if Coinbase were to go into bankruptcy, user funds could potentially be at risk. So the first piece of that is just looking through the financial statements. Coinbase is nowhere near close to bankruptcy. They have double the assets just in cash alone versus their debt. So $6 billion in cash versus $3 trillion in debt, or $3 billion in debt. And all of their ongoing actual expenses a lot of them are variable and could be cut in sort of a downturn. So, just looking at the actual data, it's pretty hard to see Coinbase going to bankruptcy anytime the sort of near term, unless crypto is essentially gone forever. So, just that part I thought was important. And if you look at the actual sort of financial statements for Coinbase, the numbers on the paper don't even capture the enormous VC book that they have. And it's hard to value things when the market's down as much as it is, but a few equity analysts have put that value of that book alone at $6 to $17 billion. So that's basically the market cap of the company right now. So overall, Coinbase is in a fine financial position. The broader problem is if they were eventually to go into bankruptcy, your funds or whoever's funds are on Coinbase could still potentially be at risk. And I think they're working on potential solutions in the future to kind of, move away from that model. And I think there's some potential regulation coming in that vein as well. The Biden administration issued some potential executive orders and things along those lines. So I think that's going to be an open question for them going forward. But, Coinbase is one of the most innovative teams, and we know where they're thinking about this just from sort of the cadence and discussion they've had. And Chase had a piece out there that actually talked about some of the new things they're thinking about doing and adding, over the past few weeks. So I'll turn it over to you, Chase.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest takeaway from looking into this stuff is, all of the reaction around like the quarterly earnings is just really overblown. People are bringing up like the fee models and stuff being unsustainable. And it's like these guys have been around for 10 years and since basically like the dawn of crypto really gaining traction. And they have some of the smartest minds. Like you don't think that they're thinking ahead a few years and looking at where they're going to pivot their fundamental business models. And like you're beginning to see where that's going to shine through. So the three big announcements that I reported on were the Coinbase Pay, which is essentially fiat to crypto conversion embedded anywhere from like a MetaMask Web3 wallet, even to specific dApps. They're not necessarily trying to play the wallet game anymore by now adding in support for direct app integrations within the regular Coinbase app. And kind of open that up to their giant user base on the app already, rather than getting like bootstrapping a whole wallet, which didn't really work. And then the final thing is this liquid staking partnership with Figment. They're working to build out Alluvial Finance, which is just going to be a liquid staking derivative platform for these larger institutions. So you see them making these announcements that probably have been in the works for a long time. And all of them reflect like a shared theme of focusing on the Web3 business models and how Coinbase can play an essential service in there. So whether it's just nailing down on converting fiat to crypto and have it be within all of those other customer distribution channels that they don't even necessarily own. As like we've talked about, there aren't a lot of moats right now in crypto. I think that's a great move on their part. And then with the liquid staking partnership, I think that will be a really big industry that will continue to grow as some of these larger players get in. And, they want to take advantage of the native yields on these networks, but they're not really comfortable with a 2-week warm up or cool down period. And so having a derivative that's pointed directly at them with KYC functionality will really allow them to get that exposure. And that's going to be something that, it really accrues to like a brand value rather than just like infinite forks on something like Lido.
Yeah. And And I think a lot of this, really tanked Coinbase's stock price, and you can see it just go down day after day. And I think it's just been an easy way for retail or the retail crowd and sort of traditional finance crowd just to short crypto in general. So instead of doing it directly with tokens, they could just short Coinbase and take advantage of the opportunity there. It's just been a one-way, basically, trade down. And the valuation at this point, just looking at traditional financial metrics, PE, price to book, all of those is sort of hilarious. It's at a point where it's almost valued as like sort of an old world industrial stock with like no growth prospects for the future and none of this, cash or VC book or any of those things. We're operating in the, most disruptive industry out there right now. So it's really interesting how the narrative's played on Coinbase and what it's really done to the price overall and the valuations.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like how Coinbase is viewed kind of like by the traditional markets, but like kind of back to like what Chase was like kind of saying. I think it actually has like pretty impactful stuff for just crypto in general. If we ever get this, we all don't go to zero, right? Because it kind of like they're trying to be this sort of normie use for DeFi, right? Like embedding some of this Uniswap, Aave, whatever they're going to put in there. It just makes it really approachable. We were kind of talking about this earlier, the DeFi mullet or whatever. Like, that's a really powerful way for users to like, okay, this is new ways to get yield. This is new ways to kind of use these coins, and they can kind of feel like they're using these products versus kind of just trading these coins back and forth on Coinbase, because you get a different type of user once you get there. And in general, like they've also kind of like done this, like that, the Coinbase Pay thing. In essence, that's kind of like KYC as a service, right? So where you get DeFi, kind of has this regulation overhang problem that kind of puts a glass ceiling on it. But, something like the Coinbase kind of has a really good role to play within that kind of conversation, particularly like with the key thing where they're kind of partitioning keys out, like making it user friendly, kind of like almost outsourcing the KYC to these DeFi protocols. Like, I don't know if that's like the vision, like kind of your degen type normal guy is gonna want to have, but like at least definitely plays like a strong argument in like framing this up, kind of making it a little bit more regulatory or approachable, in my opinion.
And circling back to the bankruptcy note that Tom brought up and the disclaimer that they put on there about like your funds could at the end of the day not be your funds. I don't think that's anything new to our community. It's obviously the adage, not your keys, not your coins. But like that's just going to be something that is going to grab headlines. If you think about it, coming out of an earnings report, that's what gets clicked, that's what gets views. So in my mind, it's just not surprising at all to see the negative backlash to something like that. But Coinbase, you can tell from these new product offerings, like it's not their plan to have everyone just be sitting on their platform forever. They want to facilitate the migration that we're going to have into like the Web3 DeFi worlds and help people and kind of understand, what these self-custody wallets are and what their new MPC modeled wallets are.
I think it also runs both ways, right? Like, I think we all have a different level of view of anarchy in the crypto ecosystem as a whole, but the world governments and TradFi isn't going anywhere anytime soon, right? So there's a high value add in being that bridge from the traditional fiat world to the DeFi world. But even say you believe the DeFi world will subsume, that there will also then at some point be a high value bridge from the DeFi world back into the traditional world, right? So it's a two-way bridge. And then kind of, as you said, with these payment rails and Dustin, I really liked what you said about KYC as a service. The moat in air quotes of a bridge like this is that KYC, like it, love it, or hate it. That makes them a special bridge compared to like a Synapse or something like that, and it's also a bridge to something that's not even a blockchain, to TradFi, right? So it's very interesting. And I think, being like, obviously I'm internally biased. I'm long crypto. I love the ecosystem. I love the culture, but I think there is real value there. do you think that this gets copied, right? Like, will it be kind of funny to see Coinbase make this move, and then maybe somebody like KuCoin, maybe somebody like Crypto.com goes, well, Crypto.com actually they have their chain, so there's the interesting line there. But does KuCoin or Kraken or Gemini, do they say, oh no, we got to fork this, we gotta run this book as well? What do you guys think?
I don't think that these other centralized exchanges really have like the capabilities right now to pull something like this off. As we've seen, like Coinbase is far and away like the largest of these players, maybe Binance for like a more global approach. But to think about like KuCoin or someone trying to get involved with this, where they're, I guess they get more of like a degen label of a centralized exchange. I don't really see that happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I think Coinbase's brand, to be honest, like, I mean, think about who the Coinbase user is, right? It's your little cousin, it's your brother, right? It's like, it's these people that traditionally aren't. It's Tom. Like the users there are the ones that are showing up for like kind of this DeFi. I just want to play around, but I want to bring my stuff on MetaMask and do all this kind of stuff. Like, that's the user that you're trying to grab. That's your next marginal user into some of these products. Whereas kind of these other exchanges are pretty much like actually just trading exchanges, right? They have funds and stuff trading on them. They don't have like that retail user capture, and that's really important, like for KYC as a service and some of these other kind of sort of things they got going on. So you can't just fork a brand by just saying, hey, we're going to launch this product.
I think the other exchanges are very trader focused too, at least the majority of them. And Coinbase really does try to be that normie kind of on ramp for folks. And that's where they'll continue to thrive. But I think they've invested in sort of incubation and, VC arm and all these other things that I think a lot of these other ones have, but don't have that commitment to, that sort of Coinbase feels like it does.
What do we think? Good spot to wrap for this week. Let's shut it down. Special thanks to Dustin, Chase, Tom, Mike, Chase, Dustin, and Tom on the research team, and Mike on our data engineering team, respectively. We will catch you not this coming Wednesday, but the Wednesday after. If all things go well, it should be in our normally scheduled time slot at 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Keep an eye out for the reminders on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. And thanks for joining.
Thank you all.
Keep building.